A young billionaire pretends to be blind and drops his wallet to test the honesty of two twin beggars, but what they do leaves him speechless. The alarm went off precisely at 5:30 a.m., echoing through the empty hallways of the mansion. James opened his eyes, staring at the ornate ceiling in his master bedroom. For a brief moment, he lay still, feeling the weight of the silence around him. Slowly, he got up, his bare feet touching the cold marble floor. James's morning routine was a solitary ballet of luxury and precision. He walked into his ensuite bathroom, larger than many apartments, and looked at his reflection in the full-length mirror. At 45 years old, James maintained a flawless appearance, carefully trimmed grey hair, a clean-shaven face, piercing blue eyes. Yet there was a hardness in his gaze, a coldness no amount of skincare could conceal. After a quick shower under multiple jets, James put on a custom-tailored suit that cost more than many of his employees earned in a year. Every movement was calculated, each piece of clothing serving as armor against the outside world. As he descended the marble stairs, the echo of his footsteps was the only sound in the massive house. The kitchen, outfitted with the most modern and expensive appliances, was immaculately clean and empty. James prepared his own coffee, a rare and costly blend. He trusted nobody else with this task, preferring total control over every detail of his life. As he sipped his coffee, James mentally reviewed his schedule for the day. Meetings, negotiations, decisions that would affect hundreds of lives. To him, they were mere numbers on a spreadsheet, pieces on a game board he played to increase his already astronomical fortune. At precisely 6:45 a.m., James left the house. His driver, Thomas, was already waiting for him with the limousine door open. "Good morning, Mr. Frost," Thomas greeted him respectfully. James simply grunted in reply, not even glancing at the man who had worked for him for more than a decade. During the ride to the office, James reviewed reports on his tablet. Numbers, charts, projections, the language he understood better than any other. Occasionally, he scribbled curt notes, decisions that would change the fate of entire departments. Arriving at the imposing skyscraper that housed his company's headquarters, James was met with a wave of anxious deference. Employees hurried to clear his path, murmuring, "Good morning, Mr. Frost," in trembling voices. He crossed the lobby without acknowledging anyone, his eyes locked on the elevators ahead. On the 50th floor, his assistant, Sarah, awaited him with a cup of coffee and a stack of documents. "Good morning, Mr. Frost. Here's the report you asked for," and James cut her off with a brusque gesture, taking the papers without a word. The morning passed in a series of meetings. In each one, James commanded the room with his intimidating presence. He cut presentations short, dismissed ideas without hesitation, and issued impossible demands with no trace of empathy. During one particularly tense meeting with the marketing team, James noticed an older employee, Robert, who seemed nervous. "You," James said sharply, pointing at him, "explain why we failed to meet last quarter's targets." Robert, a middle-aged man with 3 decades at the company, stammered as he tried to explain, Well, Mr. Frost, we had some unexpected setbacks, and—" James interrupted him. "Setbacks? That's how you justify incompetence, Sarah. Prepare his termination papers. Mr. Thompson, you're done. Effective immediately." The silence that followed was tangible, pale and shaking. Robert tried to plead his case. "But Mr. Frost, I have a family, a mortgage. Please, I've dedicated my life to this company." James looked at him with contempt. "Your life? Maybe you should have dedicated more competence. Get out of my sight before I call security." As Robert left the room, defeated, James turned to the rest of the team. "Anyone else want to share their pathetic excuses? No? Good. I want a new marketing plan on my desk by the end of the day, and if it's not excellent, there will be more firings." The remainder of the morning followed the same tone. James cut costs without regard for human impact, approved aggressive strategies that would wipe out smaller competitors, and completely disregarded any suggestion of corporate social responsibility. At noon, James stepped out for lunch. His restaurant of choice was an exclusive spot at the top of a nearby building. The maitre d' welcomed him enthusiastically, guiding him to his usual table overlooking the city. Sitting alone, James ordered his customary meal, a rare Wagyu steak and a bottle of extremely expensive red wine. While waiting, he looked down at the city below. From his elevated vantage point, people seemed like ants, insignificant and disposable. A waiter approached with trembling hands, bringing the wine. As he started to pour, he hesitantly spoke, "Sir, I wanted to say thank you. My daughter was just accepted into your foundation's scholarship program and—" James cut him off coldly. "I don't recall asking for your life story. Just pour the wine and go." Visibly shaken, the waiter finished pouring in silence and quickly left. James took a sip of the wine, savoring its rich flavor but finding no real pleasure in it. While he ate, James contemplated his next moves. He was on the brink of acquiring a smaller company. He planned to break it up, sell off the lucrative assets, and discard the rest, including most of the employees. It was a strategy that would significantly raise the stock value but ruin countless lives. To James, it was just another day at work. After lunch, James returned to the office for more meetings. Every decision he made was calculated and cold, based solely on numbers and profit projections. Proposals to improve working conditions were dismissed without consideration. Suggestions for employee wellness programs were scoffed at. Late in the afternoon, Sarah walked into his office with a cautious expression. "Mr. Frost, there's a request from HR to review the parental leave policy. A lot of employees have been complaining that—" James brusquely interrupted her. "Parental leave? If they want to have kids, they can find another job. I'm not running a charity. File this away and don't bother me with it again." Sarah nodded silently and left the room, leaving James alone with his thoughts. He turned to the window, watching the sun set over the city. For a second, he felt a pang of something. Emptiness, loneliness. He brushed it aside. Feelings were for the weak, and James Frost was anything but weak. At 8:00 p.m. sharp, James left the office. The building was nearly empty, only a few dedicated or frightened employees still toiling away. No one dared to wish him good evening. Back at his mansion, James dined alone in his enormous dining room. The chef had prepared a lavish meal, but he barely tasted it. After dinner, he poured himself some expensive whiskey and headed to his private study. Settling into a leather armchair, James reviewed the day's numbers. Profits, losses, projections, all in order. The company was more lucrative than ever, yet that nagging sense of emptiness persisted. For a fleeting moment, James allowed himself to think about Robert, the employee he'd fired. Where was he now? How would his family take the news? James pushed the thoughts away. Compassion was a weakness he couldn't afford. Glancing at the wall lined with trophies and awards, James reflected on his journey. Every success, every million, every company he'd crushed, it all felt so hollow now. When was the last time he felt genuine satisfaction? He couldn't remember. James finished his whiskey and got ready for bed. Lying in his king-size bed, in a bedroom larger than many apartments, he stared at the ceiling. The silence in his empty mansion enveloped him like a cold blanket. Tomorrow would be another day, more cold-hearted choices, more profits, more power. That was all that mattered, right? James closed his eyes, trying to drown out the little voice whispering that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than this. The Iceman drifted off to sleep, alone in his fortress of wealth and isolation, unaware that fate was about to step in and upend his tightly controlled life in a completely unexpected way. The following afternoon, James Frost left the office earlier than usual. The day had been particularly stressful, filled with tense negotiations and tough decisions. Feeling uncommonly restless, he dismissed his driver and decided to walk for a while before heading back to his lonely mansion. The downtown streets were bustling with people rushing home after a long workday. James walked with confident strides, his flawless suit and rigid posture standing out from the casual crowd around him. He observed people with a mix of disinterest and scorn, feeling superior in his bubble of wealth and power. When he turned a corner, something caught his attention. Two girls, who looked no older than 10, stood on the sidewalk selling flowers. They were identical twins, with brown hair styled in braids and wide and expressive eyes. Though clean, their clothes were visibly worn and patched. James stopped briefly, observing the girls. Emma and Olivia, as he would later learn, smiled at passers-by, offering small bouquets of wildflowers with bright, hopeful voices. Most people walked past without even looking, though a few stopped to buy a bouquet. James's first instinct was revulsion. In his mind, these children should have been in school or at home, not on the street selling flowers. He saw them as a nuisance, likely part of some con. His snap judgment was as merciless and cold as always. As he watched, James noticed how the girls appeared genuinely happy, despite their difficult circumstances. They laughed with each other, carefully arranged their flowers, and thanked each customer enthusiastically. There was an innocence in their actions that unsettled him on a deeper level. An idea suddenly formed in his mind. James had always believed honesty to be rare, especially among those less fortunate. He decided to test these girls to confirm his cynical view of the world. Moving with a skill that even surprised him, James changed his posture and expression. His shoulders slumped slightly, his eyes lost focus, and he began walking hesitantly, as though he couldn't see properly. He approached the girls, pretending not to notice them. When he was just a few steps away, James accidentally dropped his wallet on the ground. It was a slim, expensive wallet, stuffed with large bills. He kept walking, as if he hadn't realized what happened. For a moment, there was silence. James fully expected to hear the sound of running footsteps, the girls escaping with their new prize. But what he heard stunned him. "Mister! Mister!" came two childlike voices in unison. James heard the patter of small, hurried footsteps approaching. "You dropped your wallet," said one of the girls, gently touching his arm. James turned around, keeping up the act of being blind. "My wallet?" he asked, pretending confusion in his voice. "Yes, sir," the other girl answered. "It fell just back there." James held out his hand, feeling the familiar leather. Opening it carefully as though verifying its contents by touch, he asked, "Is everything here?" Probing them further. "Yes, sir," the girls answered in chorus. "We didn't touch anything. We just picked it up off the ground to give it back to you." James felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time, something he couldn't immediately identify. "Thank you, girls," he said, his voice softer than usual. "You're very honest." "Are you all right?" asked one twin, her voice filled with genuine concern. "Do you need help getting somewhere?" The other girl chimed in quickly. "We can help you cross the street if you want. It's dangerous walking alone if you can't see." James hesitated. Part of him wanted to end the charade right there, reveal he could see perfectly, and walk away. But something stopped him. The sincere concern in the girls' voices, their spontaneous offer of assistance. These were things he hadn't encountered in years. "Yes, that would be very kind of you," he heard himself say. "I need to get across the street." Immediately, James felt two small hands gently grip his arms. The girls guided him with surprising care for children so young. "There's a step here, sir," one of them warned. "Be careful not to trip." "The light is red right now," said the other. "We'll wait for a bit." As they waited to cross, the twins began describing the surroundings to James. They spoke about the store colors, a dog walking with its owner, the smell of bread coming from a nearby bakery. Their stories were full of life and enthusiasm, as if they wanted to share the world they saw with someone who couldn't see it. When the light turned green, the twins carefully guided James across the crosswalk. "There's a small dip in the asphalt here," one of them cautioned. "Lift your foot a bit more." After reaching the other side of the street, the girls asked if James needed more help. He said no, that he could continue on his own now. The twins didn't seem fully convinced. "Are you sure, sir?" asked one, genuine worry in her voice. "We don't want you to get hurt." "I'm fine, thank you," James answered, his voice rougher than normal. "You've already done so much for me." "All right then," said the other girl, "but please be careful. If you need help again, we'll be right there on the corner selling flowers." James felt the girls release his arms reluctantly. He listened to their footsteps retreat, and for a moment he had the urge to call them back, to reveal the truth, to do something. But he remained silent. Once he was sure the girls had returned to their flower stand, James recovered his sight and looked around. Sure enough, they were back at the corner, rearranging their flowers and smiling at passers-by as though nothing had happened. James felt a strange warmth growing inside his chest, both comforting and unsettling at the same time. It took him a few seconds to recognize it. His heart had been touched by the girl's kindness. For a moment, James stood on the sidewalk, watching the twins from a distance. They had nothing. Their clothes were simple. They spent their time selling flowers on the street instead of playing or studying, and yet they had helped him without a second thought. They not only returned his wallet untouched, but also genuinely cared for a stranger's well-being. The coldness James had cultivated for so many years seemed to falter for an instant. The girl's selfless kindness had touched something deep within him, something he thought had died long ago. It was a disturbing sensation, yet strangely reassuring. James shook his head, as though trying to dispel those unwanted thoughts and emotions. He was James Frost, the ruthless businessman, the Iceman. He couldn't allow himself to be affected by a simple act of kindness from two street kids. Even so, as he started walking toward his mansion, James couldn't help glancing over his shoulder one last time. The twins were still there, their bright smiles lighting up the dreary street corner. That night, lying in his king-size bed in his silent, empty bedroom, James couldn't get the image of the two girls out of his mind. Their concerned voices, the gentle way they guided him, their pure honesty, it all haunted him. For the first time in many years, James Frost fell asleep thinking not about business, profits, or power, but about two little flower sellers who had unknowingly planted a seed of change in his hardened heart. James tossed and turned, unable to find the sleep that usually came easily after his long workdays. The digital clock on his nightstand read 2:37 Bien sûr, its red numbers seeming to mock his restlessness. Every time he closed his eyes, images of the two girls popped up in his mind, their genuine smiles, their heartfelt concern, their gentle hands guiding him across the street. Everything replayed incessantly. He could see their identical faces so clearly, lit by a warmth of kindness he hadn't felt in years. Their smiles were especially unsettling. They weren't the fake, calculated grins he saw in business meetings, nor the nervous, fearful smiles of his employees. These were real smiles, free of ulterior motives, filled with a joy that defied their tough circumstances. As he recalled those smiles, James felt the weight of his deceit pressing on his conscience. He, a powerful, successful man, had deceived two innocent children. The dishonesty of his actions bothered him in a way he was not used to. Sitting up in bed, James began questioning his life choices. When did he become the type of person who would lie to children? When did success and power take precedence over basic decency? Memories of his early career flooded his mind. He remembered a younger James, full of ideals and dreams, determined to make a positive difference in the world. That younger self would never have imagined turning into the man he was now. James stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the sleeping city below. This was the first night in years he hadn't spent working, reviewing contracts or strategizing. The emptiness of that realization hit him hard. Turning around, he caught his reflection in the full-length mirror. The image looking back at him was that of a stranger, cold eyes, rigid posture, and a hardened expression. It was difficult to recognize the person he had become. A suffocating feeling of emptiness overwhelmed him. All his wealth, his power, his accomplishments, suddenly they seemed meaningless. What did he really have? An empty mansion, superficial relationships based on mutual self-interest, a life devoid of human warmth. In that moment, staring at his own reflection, James realized with painful clarity that he had lost something fundamental along the way. His humanity, his ability to truly connect with other people, had been sacrificed on the altar of financial success. Tears he hadn't shed in years began to form in his eyes. James Frost, the feared Iceman, felt himself melting under the weight of his own empty achievements and the unexpected kindness of two little flower sellers. As the night dragged on, James remained awake, confronting the harsh truths about the man he had become. The seed of change planted by the twins began to take root, and he knew, deep in his long-dormant heart, that his life would never be the same. The next morning, James Frost woke to the first rays of sunlight streaming through the curtains of his luxurious master suite. His sleep had been restless. haunted by dreams of two small figures pursuing him with enigmatic smiles. Sitting on the edge of the bed, he rubbed his eyes, trying to dispel the lingering images of the twins who had turned his world upside down the day before. For the first time in years, James hesitated before checking his phone for emails or stock quotes. Instead, he found himself contemplating the day ahead with a mix of anxiety and curiosity he hadn't felt since he was young. After a few moments of reflection, he made an impulsive decision. Getting up, James walked to his closet, large as a small apartment. Ignoring the rows of expensive suits and tailored shirts, he dug around until he found something he hadn't worn in ages: a pair of faded jeans and a simple t-shirt. He dressed quickly, completing the look with a baseball cap and sunglasses, an improvised disguise for a man who was usually the center of attention wherever he went. Sneaking out of his own home like a teenager sneaking off on some forbidden adventure, James dismissed his driver and hailed a regular taxi. The driver, a middle-aged man with a thick Eastern European accent, cast a curious glance at his oddly dressed passenger, but said nothing. "Downtown, please," James instructed in a calmer tone than the usual commanding voice he used at work. The driver nodded and set off, while James watched the familiar streets of his city through new eyes. Arriving a few blocks away from where he had encountered the twins the day before, James paid the fare and got out of the cab. His heart beat in an unfamiliar rhythm, a combination of anticipation and nervousness he hadn't experienced since his early days as an up-and-coming entrepreneur. Walking casually but alert, James approached the corner where the girls sold their flowers. From a distance, he spotted them, their brown braids shining in the morning sun. They were already at work, arranging their wildflower bouquets with focus and enthusiasm. James positioned himself strategically in a small cafe across the street, ordering a plain coffee, a drink he normally wouldn't choose, as he usually preferred exotic and expensive blends. Sitting there, partially concealed behind an open newspaper, he began his discreet observation. Hours passed, and James became entirely absorbed in the twins' routine. He watched how they approached passers-by with genuine smiles, offering their flowers with a mix of hope and determination. Many people hurried by without a glance. Some stopped to buy. Occasionally, someone would pause just to chat or donate a little money without taking any flowers. Around noon, James noticed a change in the girls' routine. Emma, or was it Olivia, he still couldn't tell them apart, pulled a small-ass worn backpack from behind a box of flowers. With near reverence, she unwrapped a paper-covered sandwich. James felt his heart clench at the scene that unfolded. With touching care, the girl divided the sandwich perfectly in half, handing one piece to her sister. The two sat on the edge of the curb, legs swinging as they savored their modest lunch. The contrast with his own dining habits struck James like a punch in the gut. He recalled his business lunches at upscale restaurants, where elaborate dishes and fine wines were consumed without a second thought, often while talking about mergers and acquisitions. Here were two children finding more joy in a single shared sandwich than he had ever felt during his lavish meals. The girls chatted and laughed as they ate, as if that moment was the most precious thing in the world. And perhaps, for them, it was. In their innocence and simplicity, they had found a treasure James's money could never buy: genuine contentment. After their break, the twins returned to their work with renewed energy. James noticed how they looked after each other throughout the day. When one seemed tired, the other took the lead in selling flowers. They took turns drinking water from a shared bottle, always making sure the other drank first. At one particularly moving moment, James witnessed a scene that nearly brought him to tears. An elderly woman, clearly unsteady on her feet, was struggling with heavy shopping bags. Without hesitation, the twins put down their flowers and ran to help. They took the heaviest bags despite her gentle protests and accompanied her to a nearby bus stop. James watched, fascinated, as the girls conversed animatedly with the elderly lady, laughing at something she said, their faces glowing with genuine smiles. When the bus arrived, they helped her climb aboard, waving cheerfully as it pulled away. Returning to their makeshift stand, the girls showed no expectation of any reward or recognition for their good deed. For them, helping someone in need seemed as natural as breathing. A short while later, Another touching moment played out before James's attentive eyes. A stray dog, clearly malnourished and with patchy fur, approached the twins, panting in the heat. Without a second thought, the girls paused their work to tend to the animal. One girl grabbed the water bottle, while the other used her own hands as a makeshift bowl. Patiently and affectionately, they let the dog drink, gently petting its fur as it gulped down the water. Grateful, the dog wagged its tail and licked the girl's hands before wandering off. James felt a lump form in his throat. How many times had he walked past people or animals in need without even noticing? These children, who had so little themselves, still found the generosity to share what little they had. What impressed James the most, beyond their acts of kindness, was the constancy of the twins' smiles. It didn't matter if they were selling flowers, helping someone, or just chatting between themselves. Their faces consistently radiated genuine joy. It was a stark contrast to the stressed, anxious expressions he saw every day in the corporate world, including his own reflection. As the hours went by, James began to notice something he had never considered. True wealth wasn't in bank accounts or investment portfolios. It was right there, in front of him, embodied by two young girls who owned next to nothing, materially yet seemed to possess everything that truly mattered. The twins had something James had lost long ago: the ability to find joy in simple things, to connect honestly with other people, to give without expecting anything in return. They had a richness of spirit that all his money could never buy. As he watched, James felt a wave of emotion he hadn't felt in years. It was a mix of admiration, envy, and a deep sadness. He realized that despite all his wealth, he was far poorer than those two little girls. It hit him like a hammer. Money doesn't buy happiness. It was a cliché he had always dismissed as an excuse of the weak and unsuccessful. But now, observing the twins' genuine joy, he finally understood the truth behind those words. James thought about his own life, his lonely mornings in a massive mansion, his exclusive lunches in five-star restaurants where he barely tasted the food, his empty nights consumed by work. He owned everything money could buy, but nothing that truly mattered. The girls, meanwhile, appeared to have discovered the secret to genuine happiness. They had each other, the ability to find joy in splitting a sandwich, and the generosity to help strangers without looking for a reward. They possessed a richness of the heart and soul that James had never known. As he pondered these revelations, James was snapped out of his thoughts by a sudden shift. The twins, who had been busy with their flowers, had stopped abruptly and were looking straight at him. James's heart pounded. Had they recognized him? Had his disguise failed? He braced himself to stand up and leave, but something in the girl's gaze kept him frozen in his seat. The twins exchanged a quick glance, a silent communication unique to siblings, especially identical twins. Then, with decisive steps, they crossed the street toward the cafe where James was seated. James felt panic surge. Part of him wanted to run and avoid any confrontation, maintaining the pretense of anonymity. But a stronger part of him, a part he barely recognized, kept him rooted in place, waiting to see what would happen. The girls stopped in front of his table, their large, expressive eyes fixed on him with a mix of curiosity and disappointment. James swallowed hard, unable to look away. "Sir," one of them began, her voice soft but firm, "you're not really blind, are you?" The question, so direct and innocent, hit James like lightning. He opened his mouth to speak, to deny it, to concoct an elaborate excuse, but no sound came out. For the first time in his adult life, James Frost, the ruthless corporate shark, found himself speechless. The other twin, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, continued, "We saw you step aside for a baby stroller earlier, and now you're reading the newspaper." James felt as though the ground was giving way beneath him. The lie he had thought so trivial now seemed monstrous in the face of the children's pure honesty. James began, his voice hoarse and unrecognizable, even to himself. "I'm not blind." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with disappointment and truth. He saw the girls' expressions shift, the hope and admiration they might have felt replaced by something darker and sadder. Emma, he now noticed a small mole near her left eye that distinguished her from her sister, stepped forward, her eyes brimming but her voice resolutely steady. "Why did you lie to us?" It was a simple question, direct yet utterly devastating. James felt each word like a dagger cutting through the protective armor he had spent years building around his heart. How could he explain his world of power plays to children who saw life with pure eyes? How could he justify a lie told on a whim without caring about its impact? James tried again, but the words would not come. For the first time in decades, he was forced to face the raw reality of his actions, without the layers of rationalization and justifications he usually relied on. Olivia, the other twin, moved closer and held her sister's hand tightly. Her gaze was a mixture of disappointment and a wisdom beyond her years. "Our grandma always says honesty is the most important thing, that without trust, we have nothing." The child's simple words struck James more powerfully than any formal argument from his lawyers or consultants ever had. He looked at these two girls not as objects of curiosity or a social experiment, but as teachers, offering him a lesson he had long forgotten. "You're right," James finally managed, his voice low and shaky with emotion. "I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. I'm sorry." Apologies, so rare on his lips, felt strange. At the same time, a sense of relief washed over him, like a burden being lifted from his shoulders. The twins exchanged another quick look, a silent exchange happening in mere seconds. Then, in unison, they turned to leave. "Wait," James called out, a hint of desperation in his voice that surprised even him. "Please, But the girls were already crossing the street back to their flower stand. James watched powerless as they returned to their work, their smiles dimmer and their shoulders drooping. The impact of the disappointment in the twins' eyes remained etched in James's mind. That look of pure disillusionment, that loss of innocence he had caused with his selfish lie, would haunt him for a long time. At that moment, something changed inside James Frost. The thick walls around his heart, his emotional armor, began to crack. A lesson in honesty and integrity from two street kids had penetrated deeper than any high-stakes negotiation or corporate maneuver ever could. James remained seated at the cafe long after the girls left, his coffee forgotten and cold. He watched them from a distance, noticing how their movements seemed heavier, their smiles a bit less radiant. Guilt consumed him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. As the sun began to set, James saw the twins packing up. They carefully stowed their belongings, exchanging gentle words he couldn't hear. Before leaving, they glanced one more time in his direction, their eyes filled with disappointment and something that looked like hope. That final glance was the catalyst James needed. He stood up abruptly, determined to do something, anything, to make up for the wrong he had done. But as he took a step toward the girls, they vanished into the early evening crowd. James remained frozen on the sidewalk, feeling more lost than he ever had in his life. The Iceman was melting under the heat of truth and innocence these two children had unexpectedly brought into his life. As he slowly walked back home, James knew nothing would be the same. The twins' lesson in honesty, the heartbreak in their eyes, had reached something deep inside him. He couldn't go back to being who he was. Night fell over the city, but for James Frost a new day was just beginning. A day of reflection, regret, and possibly redemption. The girls had planted a seed of change in his heart, and he was determined not to let it wither. Entering his mansion, James's footsteps echoed through the empty corridors. What once had filled him with pride now felt suffocating. The twins' words echoed in his mind, each syllable silently accusing the man he had become. Climbing the stairs to his bedroom, James undressed mechanically, dropping his expensive clothes on the floor without his usual care. He lay down on his king-size bed, but sleep refused to come. He tossed and turned, unable to find comfort in the luxury sheets that cost more than some people made in a month. "Why did you lie to us?" Emma's voice, tinged with hurt and confusion, replayed in his head like a broken record. James clenched his eyes shut, but he couldn't escape the image of the tears threatening to spill from the twins' eyes, the sadness on their faces when they discovered his deception. A wave of shame overwhelmed him so intensely he felt nauseous. How had he ended up here? When had he become the kind of person who would lie to innocent children without a second thought? Sitting up in bed, James looked around his opulent bedroom. Each piece of furniture, every decor item, seemed to mock him with its emptiness. The Patek Philippe watch on his nightstand, the Picasso on the wall, the closet full of custom suits, all felt devoid of meaning. His thoughts returned to the twins, to the joy they found in simple things. A shared sandwich, caring for each other, and their generosity toward strangers, such stark contrast to his own hollow existence. James rose from the bed and went down to the kitchen, opening the fridge stocked with gourmet foods prepared by his personal chef. How many lonely meals had he consumed, sipping rare wines from crystal glasses, utterly numb to any real pleasure? The absence of genuine connections in his life became painfully clear. While the twins seemed to have an unbreakable bond with each other, James couldn't remember the last time he had a meaningful conversation with anyone. In his relentless pursuit of success, he had isolated himself from the rest of the world. Wandering through the empty rooms of his mansion, James thought about his relationships, co-workers, business partners, even the few people he called friends. Those bonds were superficial, built on mutual interest and the advantages they offered each other. There was no true warmth, no genuine affection. A profound loneliness gripped him. It was a deep, piercing solitude no amount of money could remedy. He had the means to buy practically anything he wanted, but the one thing he truly yearned for, genuine human connection, remained out of reach. James found himself looking back over his life, trying to pinpoint exactly when he had lost his values. He realized it wasn't a single event, but a series of minor compromises that had seemed insignificant at the time. He had been slowly corrupted by money, lured by promises of power and status, until the drive for more became his sole motivation. Sitting in his study, surrounded by awards and industry accolades, James felt emptier than ever. Those trophies, once a source of pride, now seemed to mock him, a silent reminder of the human cost of his success. The contrast between his life and the twins was staggering. They, with so little, seemed to have it all. He, with so much, had nothing that truly mattered. The realization hit him with painful clarity. He had lost his way somewhere along the path. As the night dragged on, James continued his solitary reflection. Every corner of his mansion seemed to hold a memory of a misguided decision, moments when he chose personal gain over compassion and profit over ethics. By the time the first rays of sunlight crept through the windows, James had made a decision. He couldn't keep living like this, empty, alone, hidden behind walls of wealth and power. He needed to change. He had to do something truly meaningful, something that didn't revolve around merely making more money or securing more power. With a clarity he hadn't felt in years, James began to plan. He would return to that corner, find those twins. This time, he would approach them with honesty, not lies. He'd offer real help, food, clothes, and whatever might improve their lives. His anxiety grew as he mapped out his plan. Doing something good, something selfless, was uncharted territory for James. He found himself fretting over details he usually delegated to assistants. Which foods to bring, what clothing would be suitable. When the sun finally rose fully, it found James still awake, exhausted yet with a newfound light in his eyes that had long been absent. The Iceman was thawing, and in his place emerged a man determined to rediscover his humanity and make a difference in the world. At the first hours of the morning, James left his mansion, not heading to the office as usual, but on a personal mission of redemption. He didn't know how the twins would react to seeing him again, or whether they would accept his offers of help. But for the first time in a long while, James Frost was doing something not for personal gain, but simply because it was the right thing to do. And so, with a heavy heart filled with regret yet buoyed by the possibility of change, James set off to meet his destiny, carrying not just food and clothes but also the hope of a second chance. James walked through the busy downtown streets, his arms laden with paper bags from upscale stores. His heart pounded, a mixture of nerves and hope he hadn't experienced in years. As he neared the familiar corner, his eyes immediately found the two small figures who had altered his life. There they were, the twins, smiling at passers-by as they sold their flowers. For a moment, James hesitated, guilt and shame threatening to overwhelm him. but he steeled himself and walked on, determined to make things right. As he approached, James saw the moment the girls recognized him. Their smiles faltered, and they exchanged anxious looks. His heart sank at the caution in their eyes, knowing he was the cause. "Hello?" he said quietly, his voice imbued with an unaccustomed humility. I'd like to talk to you, if that's all right." The twins studied him with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Finally, Emma spoke. "You're back." It wasn't a question. James nodded nonetheless. "Yes, I'm back. And I owe you both an apology." He knelt down to their level, setting the bags beside him. "What I did yesterday, lying to you, was wrong. Really wrong. I have no excuse, and I understand if you don't forgive me, but I wanted you to know how sorry I am." The words were difficult to say, but for the first time in ages, James spoke with sincere remorse. He noticed the girls' eyes widen in surprise, and for a moment, none of them spoke. Olivia broke the silence. "Why did you do it?" The question was simple, yet laden with implication. James felt the shame rise in his cheeks. I don't have a good reason. I was selfish and didn't think about how it might affect you. I lost sight of what really matters in life." He paused, swallowing hard before continuing. "But you reminded me. You showed me what true kindness, honesty, and compassion look like, and I want to try to be better." James gestured toward the bags at his side. "I brought you some things, food, clothes. I know it doesn't make up for what I did, but I hope they might help in some way." The twins looked at the bags, then at each other. James waited, heart pounding. At last, Emma took a small step forward. "You didn't have to bring anything," she said gently, "but thank you for apologizing. Our grandma always says admitting a mistake is the first step to fixing it." James felt immense relief at her words, mingled with growing curiosity. "Your grandma must be a very wise woman," he remarked softly. The girls exchanged another look, and this time Olivia answered, She's taken care of us on her own ever since since they passed away." James felt his heart twist with sympathy. "I'm so sorry to hear that," he said softly. "It must be hard." Emma nodded, her eyes suddenly looking much older than her years. "Sometimes it's really hard, especially now that Grandma is sick." "Sick?" James repeated, genuine concern welling up inside him. Olivia continued her sister's explanation. "Yeah, she's been sick for a while. That's why we sell flowers, to help buy her medicine." James felt as though he'd been punched in the stomach. Here were two children, bearing responsibilities no child should face, while he squandered his wealth on trivial luxuries. "Our grandma always looked after us," Emma added, her voice brimming with love and worry. "She taught us everything, about honesty, hard work, helping others. Now it's our turn to look after her." Olivia nodded. "It's tough sometimes, but we do our best. Grandma needs lots of medicine, and it's expensive, but we can't let her go without it." James absorbed each word, his heart aching for their courage and dedication, their love for their grandmother, the responsibilities they had assumed at such a young age. It was profoundly moving. "You're both amazing," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "What you're doing for your grandma, it's truly special." The twins blushed, a gentle pink coloring their cheeks. "We're just doing what's right," Emma said simply. Right then and there, looking at these determined faces, James made a decision. It wasn't just about handing them food or clothes. He intended to change their lives completely. "I want to help," he stated firmly, resolve in his voice. "Not just with these bags, but really help. With your grandma's medicine, whatever you need." The girls looked at him, eyes wide with surprise and caution. "Why?" Olivia asked, her voice small but filled with curiosity. James offered a gentle smile. "Because you taught me something very important, about what truly matters in life, and I want to make a difference, the right way this time." He extended his hand to the twins. "What do you think? Can we start over? This time, with honesty and kindness." Emma and Olivia shared another silent twin exchange. Then slowly, They reached out their small hands and placed them on James's. "All right," Emma said, a hint of a smile returning. "We can try." James felt a wave of emotion wash over him. He knew this was just the beginning. There was so much to do, so many wrongs to right. But there on that busy street corner, with two small hands resting on his, James Frost felt he was finally on the right path. "Thank you," he said softly, voice brimming with gratitude. "I promise I won't let you down this time." With that vow, James set off on a journey that would change not only the lives of the twins and their grandmother, but also his own, more deeply than he could ever imagine. James walked alongside the twins, arms filled with bags of food and clothing. Emma and Olivia led the way through the bustling downtown streets, gradually moving toward an older, more neglected part of the city. As they went, James noticed the changing surroundings. Buildings were more run down, sidewalks more damaged, and the looks people gave them more guarded. After about 20 minutes, the girls stopped in front of a dilapidated old building. The paint was peeling from the walls, and several windows were either broken or boarded up. A faded sign above the entrance read, "Hope Shelter." "This is where we live," Emma said quietly, a trace of embarrassment in her voice. James felt a lump in his throat. The contrast between this place and his own palatial home was jarring. "Does live here?" he asked, unable to hide the concern in his voice. Olivia nodded. "Ever since Grandma got too sick to work, it's just temporary," she added quickly, as if to reassure him. "Until we save enough for her medicine and find someplace better." James's heart clenched with admiration for their courage and optimism under such difficult circumstances. He followed them inside, the smell of dampness and cheap disinfectant hitting his nose. The interior was as bleak as the exterior. Narrow, dimly lit hallways led to small, shared rooms. James saw entire families crammed into spaces barely large enough for one person. The sounds of children crying and adults arguing echoed through thin walls. Emma and Olivia guided him up a creaking staircase to the second floor. They stopped at a door at the end of the corridor. "Grandma's in here," Emma said, her voice a blend of love and worry. "She's been really weak lately." James nodded, feeling an unfamiliar mix of nervousness and anticipation. The girls opened the door quietly, and he followed them into a tiny room. The cramped space was dominated by a single bed and a worn-out chair. In the corner stood a small dresser, meticulously organized with personal items. A narrow window let in a thin beam of light, illuminating the face of an elderly woman resting on the bed. James felt his heart race as he looked at her. Something about her features, despite the age and illness, struck him as oddly familiar. The woman slowly opened her eyes, alerted by their entrance. Her gaze drifted over her granddaughters first, lighting up with a loving smile before shifting to James. For a moment she appeared puzzled, then her eyes widened in recognition. "James?" she whispered, her voice frail but clear. "Little James? Is that really you?" James froze, memories flooding his mind. A younger version of this woman, with brown hair and a gentle smile, caring for him as a child. The scent of chicken soup and the sound of bedtime stories, reminiscences buried under years of ambition and coldness. "Margaret?" he finally managed, his voice thick with emotion. "Nurse Margaret?" The twins exchanged confused looks. It was Margaret who broke the silence, turning to her granddaughters with a weak smile. "Emma, Olivia, this is James. Many years ago, I was a nurse in his family's home. I took care of his mother when she was ill." Tears filled James's eyes. He approached the bed and dropped to his knees, taking the older woman's frail hand in his. "Margaret," he murmured, "I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I never looked for you. I lost my way." Margaret squeezed his hand weakly, her eyes brimming with empathy. "Oh, James," she said, "you were always a good boy. You just forgot that for a while." James bowed his head, shame and gratitude mingling in his heart. How did this happen?" he asked, glancing around the bleak room. Margaret sighed, her gaze shifting to the twins. "Life doesn't always turn out how we expect," she replied. "When my daughter and her husband passed, leaving Emma and Olivia behind, I couldn't abandon them. I used all my savings to care for them, Then I got sick." Her voice faltered, and James felt a surge of determination. He stood up, still holding Margaret's hand. "This ends now," he said, his voice firm. "I'm going to take care of you, all of you." The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. James made dozens of phone calls, using every bit of his influence and resources to arrange top-notch care for Margaret and her family. Within hours, an ambulance arrived to transfer Margaret to the city's best private hospital. James insisted on accompanying her, with Emma and Olivia by his side. At the hospital, a specialized medical team awaited them, ready to commence thorough treatment. While Margaret underwent tests and received initial care, James organized the rest. He secured a fully furnished, spacious apartment for them. He made sure the twins were enrolled in the best local school, all expenses covered. He even hired a professional caregiver to assist Margaret during her recovery. In the days that followed, James practically moved into the hospital. He spent hours by Margaret's bedside, listening to stories of his mother he had never heard. "Your mother was so brave," Margaret often said, her eyes shining with recollection. "Even on her worst days, she always managed to smile for you, James. She loved you more than anything." James soaked up every word, feeling a reconnection to a part of himself he had buried. In moments of vulnerability, he confessed to Margaret about the deception that had led him to the twins. "I pretended to be blind," he admitted, voice tinged with shame. "I wanted to test their honesty. I was so foolish, so arrogant." Margaret listened silently, then gently placed a hand on his cheek. "James," she said softly, "sometimes fate uses strange means to take us where we need to be. You made a mistake, yes, but look at all the good that's come from it. You found your way back." Her words resonated deeply. James began to see recent events from a new perspective. The lie he so regretted had, in fact, guided him exactly where he was meant to be. It was as if the universe had conspired to steer him back to the right path. As days turned into weeks, remarkable changes took place. Margaret responded well to treatment, gaining strength each day. The twins thrived in their new school, their smiles brighter than ever. And James changed in ways he could never have predicted. The Iceman persona crumbled, replaced by a man filled with compassion and purpose. He became a constant presence in Margaret's and the girls' lives, providing not just financial support, but genuine love and care. Emma and Olivia, initially cautious due to James's initial deceit, began to see him differently. They watched him tend to their grandmother with such dedication and listened to stories of his childhood. Over time, they learned to trust him. One day, as James was reading a story to the girls in Margaret's hospital room, Olivia looked at him with her large brown eyes and asked, "Uncle James, will you stay with us forever?" James felt his heart swell with a feeling he barely recognized. "If you'll have me," he answered quietly, "I'll stay as long as you want." Emma smiled, taking his hand. "We do want that," she said simply. In that moment, James knew his life was forever changed. He was no longer the isolated man who cared only about business and profit. He had found a family, a purpose, a reason to be better. As Margaret recovered and the family settled into their new home, James began re-evaluating every aspect of his life. He reorganized his company, implementing more ethical, people-focused policies. He established a foundation to help families in situations similar to Margaret's and the twins. Those lonely nights in his empty mansion were replaced by lively dinners with his new family. Weekends, once devoted to work, were spent playing in the park, visiting museums, and chatting at the kitchen table. Margaret, now in better health, became a constant source of wisdom and guidance for James. She gently reminded him of his roots, sharing stories of his childhood and his mother. "Your mother would be so proud of the man you've become," she often told him, her eyes brimming with affection. The twins, for their part, brought a joy and spontaneity to James's life that he never realized he lacked. Their infectious laughter, boundless curiosity, and unconditional love healed wounds in his heart he didn't even know were there. One afternoon, as he watched Emma and Olivia playing in the garden of their new home with Margaret sitting nearby, James experienced a peace he had never known. "You know, Margaret," he said softly, I spent most of my life believing success meant more money, more power. But now I understand. Real success is this: having people to love, making a difference in someone's life. Margaret smiled, placing her hand over his gently. You always had that potential, James. You just needed a reminder. James nodded, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He thought about the events that had led him here. The lies, or his encounter with the twins, his reunion with Margaret. It all felt like part of a bigger plan, a path that fate had laid out for him. Sometimes we have to lose ourselves to truly find our way, he reflected. Margaret agreed. And sometimes we need little angels to point us in the right direction, she said, gazing lovingly at her granddaughters. James followed her gaze, his heart brimming with love for the family destiny had given him. He knew there was still much to do, many ways to bring positive change to the world. But now he had a clear purpose, a reason to be better every day. As the sun set, painting the sky in pink and gold, James Frost, no longer an Iceman but a reborn man, embraced his new family. The future stretched out before him, full of promise and possibilities. And for the first time in many years, he felt genuine excitement about what tomorrow might bring. As night fell, James, Margaret, and the twins went back inside, the air still filled with laughter and lively conversation. As he helped prepare dinner, something he would once have deemed beneath him, James reflected on the incredible journey that had led him here. He glanced around the cozy kitchen, watching Emma and Olivia help Margaret set the table, their cheerful voices filling the space with a warmth his mansion never possessed. In that moment, James knew he was exactly where he belonged. "Uncle James," Olivia called, interrupting his thoughts, "are you going to tell us a story after dinner?" James smiled, feeling his heart expand with affection. "Absolutely, sweetheart. How about the story of two little flower sellers who changed a stubborn man's life?" The girls giggled, exchanging knowing smiles, while Margaret looked on with shining eyes full of pride and love. That evening, as the family gathered for another meal brimming with warmth and shared stories, James Frost realized he had found something infinitely more valuable than all the money and power he'd accumulated. He had found a home, a purpose, and above all, the true meaning of love and family. And so, with his heart full of gratitude and his eyes set on a bright future, James embraced his new life, ready to face any challenge that came his way as long as he had his family by his side. The months that followed were a time of transformation and healing for everyone involved. Margaret's treatment at the top-tier hospital James had arranged was yielding impressive results. With each visit, she seemed stronger, her face regaining color and her eyes sparkling with renewed vitality. The medical team was amazed at Margaret's progress. "It's as if she found a new reason to live," the head physician remarked during a consultation. James knew that this newfound will to live was fueled by the love and support of her reunited family. Meanwhile, Emma and Olivia flourished at their new school. Surrounded by motivated teachers and better resources, they discovered a passion for learning that had been overshadowed by their previous struggles. James received frequent updates on their progress and couldn't help feeling a fatherly pride every time he heard about their excellent grades and positive feedback from teachers. The twins, once shy and worn down by hardship, now glowed with confidence. They made new friends, joined after-school clubs, and returned home each day brimming with stories about their exciting adventures at school. True to his promise, James visited them regularly. Early on, these visits were a bit awkward. James was still navigating how to express the warmth and affection he'd kept locked away for so long. But over time, and with the patient help of Margaret and the twins, he began to open up. It was during these visits that James rediscovered something he'd lost: the ability to smile authentically. Emma and Olivia, with their contagious laughter and fresh outlook on life, became his teachers in the art of forgotten joy. One day, during a spirited board game, James caught himself laughing out loud. Such a genuine laugh that it surprised even him. The girls paused the game, wide-eyed. "Uncle James," Emma said, voice full of wonder, "you have dimples when you laugh." James touched his cheeks, feeling the slight indentations. He couldn't remember the last time he had smiled so broadly that his dimples showed. "I guess you girls are teaching me how to be happy again," he replied gently, feeling a rush of emotion. Olivia came over and hugged him tight. "We like your smile, Uncle James. You should use it more often." From that day on, James made a conscious effort to smile more, to let the happiness he felt inside radiate outward. It was as if the layers of ice had finally melted, revealing a warmth and openness he had long suppressed. Margaret, now stronger and more spirited, began telling more stories about James's mother during his visits. Sitting in their cozy new living room, with the twins snuggled beside him, James listened avidly, absorbing every detail about the mother he barely remembered. "Your mother had an adventurous spirit, you know," Margaret said one sunny afternoon. "Even when she was sick, she talked about the places she wanted to visit, the things she wanted to do. She always said life was too short not to dream big." James devoured each story, discovering aspects of his mother he had never known. He learned of her love for painting, her passion for poetry, and how she would sing to him every night, even when her voice was frail. "She wanted you to grow up knowing you were loved," Margaret added, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "She talked about you constantly, how she believed you'd become an incredible man someday." These recollections profoundly affected James, enabling him to reconnect not only with his mother's memory, but also with parts of himself he had long buried. Often he wept, a mixture of sorrow for her loss and gratitude for the chance to know her once more through Margaret's eyes. Emma and Olivia, keenly sensitive to the emotion of these moments, would often snuggle closer to James, offering silent comfort with their hugs. This simple show of affection did more to heal James's wounded heart than any amount of therapy ever could. Over time, James found himself reconnecting with his feelings in ways he never expected. He rediscovered the joy of carefree laughter, the solace of a warm embrace, even the release of a good cry. The family he'd stumbled upon was piecing his humanity back together. When Christmas arrived, James felt a happiness he hadn't experienced in decades. In past years, the holiday had been just another workday, often spent alone in his office. But this year was different. The house was decorated with twinkling lights and colorful ornaments, many handcrafted by Emma and Olivia. The smell of freshly baked cookies filled the air, and festive music played throughout the rooms. James found himself immersed in preparations with an enthusiasm that took him by surprise. On Christmas Eve, gathered around the tree with Margaret and the twins, James felt a surge of emotion. He looked at the beaming faces around him, at the neatly wrapped presents under the tree, and realized he had found what no amount of money could buy: a real family. "Thank you," he said softly, voice thick with emotion, "for accepting me, for giving me another chance. You're the best Christmas gift I could have received." Margaret reached out and gently squeezed his hand. "That's what family does, James. Family is about second chances and unconditional love. You were always a part of this family. You just needed to remember." Sensing the tender moment, the twins jumped into James's arms for a group hug. "Merry Christmas, Uncle James," they shouted in unison, their laughter echoing through the room. That night, as he watched Emma and Olivia dozing on the couch, worn out from the excitement of opening gifts, James reflected on the remarkable journey of the past few months. He thought about the man he had been not so long ago, cold, solitary, obsessed with wealth and power, and could scarcely believe how much he had changed. The healing he had witnessed in recent months wasn't just physical, like Margaret's recovery. It was a deep emotional healing that had touched all of them. Margaret had regained not only her health, but also a renewed sense of purpose. The twins, free from worries about medicine and bills, were now able to be children, free to dream and grow. And James, he had rediscovered his humanity. He had reconnected with his capacity to love, to care, to influence others' lives for the better. The Iceman was gone, replaced by a man filled with compassion, gratitude, and genuine purpose. With the fire crackling softly in the fireplace and the final notes of a Christmas carol playing in the background, James silently made a vow. He promised himself he would never again lose sight of what really mattered in life, that he would always put love and family above any material wealth. Comforted by this thought, James settled on the couch beside the sleeping twins, feeling truly at peace for the first time in years. The future spanned out before him, filled with promises and possibilities, and he could hardly wait to see what the next chapter of life with his new family would bring. As the night wore on, James stayed awake, soaking in the serenity and warmth of the moment. The soft glow of the Christmas tree lights illuminated Emma and Olivia's sleeping faces, and he could hear Margaret's peaceful breathing from the next room. In that quiet instant, James felt an immense gratitude for the unexpected path his life had taken. He knew there was still much to learn and many ways to grow, but for the first time in years, he welcomed the future with open arms. Carefully, to avoid waking the girls, James got up and walked to the window. Light snow was falling outside, blanketing the world in a pure white layer. It felt as if nature itself was celebrating this new beginning. "Merry Christmas, Mom," he whispered to the starry sky, feeling closer to her than ever since she'd passed. With one last, tender glance at his sleeping family, James settled back on the couch, allowing sleep to overtake him. For the first time in decades, he drifted off wearing a contented smile, his heart full of love and hope for the future. With the start of the new year, James Frost returned to his office with a renewed mission. The experiences of the past months had forever changed his view on life and business, and he was determined to reshape his company according to his new values. In his first meeting with senior management, James stunned everyone with his new vision. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began in a firm yet warm tone, "it's time we rethink our entire approach. We can't focus solely on profits anymore. We have a responsibility to our communities, our employees, and the world at large." The directors exchanged baffled glances. This was not the James Frost they knew, the merciless Iceman who put profits above everything else. But as James explained his plans, many started to feel energized by the new direction. His first major initiative was establishing a foundation to aid families in need. Drawing inspiration from Margaret and the twins, he spoke of how easily hard-working families could be pushed to the brink of poverty by unforeseen circumstances. "Imagine how many Margarets are out there," he said at a press conference launching the foundation. "People who devoted their lives to caring for others, only to find themselves helpless when they need help the most. Our foundation will change that." The Frost Foundation, as it was named, focused on providing medical aid, housing, and education to families facing predicaments similar to Margaret's. James invested a substantial part of his personal fortune and encouraged other executives to do the same. Within his own company, James introduced a series of radical reforms. Comprehensive healthcare programs were implemented for all employees, ensuring no one would have to choose between paying bills and looking after their health. "Our employees are our greatest asset," James declared at a company-wide meeting. "And it's time we act like it." Beyond healthcare, James instituted generous parental leave policies, professional development programs, and even set up an emergency fund for employees facing unexpected hardships. The change in the company's atmosphere was immediate. Employees who once walked the halls with lowered heads, afraid to cross paths with Mr. Frost, now smiled and greeted each other with enthusiasm. Productivity rose, as did employee loyalty. One day, to everyone's surprise, James brought Emma and Olivia in for a visit. The twins, wearing their school uniforms and carrying colorful backpacks, gazed around the towering corporate building in awe. "Wow, Uncle James," Emma exclaimed as they rode a glass elevator. "So you really do work here?" James laughed, a sound many of his employees had never heard before. "Yes, my dear, this is my workplace." As James guided the girls through the office, introducing them to staff and showing them different departments, a noticeable shift occurred. People lit up with smiles, conversations buzzed, and a hopeful, positive energy filled the air, emanating from the twins themselves. "Mr. Frost," said Sarah, his longtime assistant, tears shining in her eyes. "I've never seen the office so alive." James nodded, feeling moved. "Me neither, Sarah. I think we all needed this reminder of what really matters." Employees watched with amazement as James interacted with the girls. The man, once known for his icy demeanor, now laughed openly, patiently answered their questions, and even got down on one knee to speak to them at eye level while explaining how certain equipment worked. "Who are those girls?" a new employee whispered to a colleague. I'm not sure, the co-worker replied, but whoever they are, they've completely melted the boss's heart. Over the following weeks and months, James's transformation and that of the company became even more apparent. He learned to balance business needs with the needs of actual people, making decisions not just for profits, but also for employee well-being and community welfare. James also began spending more time visiting various departments, talking to employees of all ranks, listening to concerns and ideas. He launched an employee suggestion program, rewarding innovative proposals that improved the company or helped it serve society better. Remember, he often said in meetings, our responsibility goes beyond the numbers in a spreadsheet. We have the power to make a real difference in people's lives, and that must be our priority. Meanwhile, Margaret was recovering fully and expressed a desire to be useful in some capacity. Recognizing her wisdom and experience, James invited her to join the Frost Foundation. No one understands the families we're helping better than you, Margaret, he said. Your perspective is invaluable. Margaret gladly accepted, bringing to the foundation not only her personal experience, but also her decades of nursing expertise. Under her guidance, the foundation expanded its medical assistance programs and formed partnerships with local hospitals to deliver quality care to low-income families. Her presence in the foundation added a human touch that resonated with everyone involved. Margaret had a knack for making each family feel truly heard and cared for. Over time, James's company became a shining example of corporate social responsibility. Other businesses took notice, implementing similar initiatives. Newspapers and business magazines featured stories on the Frost Revolution, highlighting how a more empathetic and ethical approach could benefit both society and long-term profitability. At a major business conference where James was invited to speak about his company's transformation, he shared a personal insight. A few months ago, I was known as the Iceman. I believed that succeeding in business meant being cold and emotionally distant. But thanks to 2 little flower sellers and 1 retired nurse, I learned that true strength comes from compassion and human connection. Today, our company isn't just more profitable, it's more meaningful. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the real definition of success. The crowd gave him a standing ovation, many with tears in their eyes. From the stage, James spotted Margaret, Emma, and Olivia in the front row, beaming with pride. His heart swelled with gratitude for the family fate had given him and for the opportunity to make a positive difference in the world. That evening, as he returned home with his family, James reflected on the incredible journey he had traveled. The Iceman had completely transformed, not just personally, but in his approach to business. He had learned that a true legacy isn't measured by the size of a bank account, but by the number of lives touched. Watching Emma and Olivia skip happily ahead of him, laughing and joking, and Margaret walking beside him, James felt he had found the balance he'd been searching for unconsciously. He was now a whole person, a successful executive, yes, but also a loving uncle, a loyal friend, and above all, a compassionate human being. The transformation was complete, yet James knew this was only the beginning of a new journey, one of ongoing growth, learning, and positive impact on the world. He looked forward to seeing where this path would lead. It had been a year since that fateful day when James Frost, the feared Iceman, encountered 2 little flower sellers who forever changed his life. Now seated at the head of his mansion's dining table, surrounded by laughter and animated conversation, James could hardly believe how much had shifted for him and everyone around him. Margaret, now fully recovered, glowed with health and purpose. Her eyes sparkled whenever she spoke of the latest Frost Foundation projects, where she now served as a senior advisor. Her lifetime of experience and wisdom were invaluable to the organization, shaping policies that made a real, tangible impact on people's lives. You know, James, Margaret said, pausing to address him directly, I never thought that at 65 I'd be embarking on a new career. But thanks to you and the foundation, I feel like I'm making a difference in ways I always dreamed of. James returned her smile, feeling a wave of gratitude. The foundation is lucky to have you, Margaret. Your vision has been crucial to our success. Across the table, Emma and Olivia chatted excitedly about their school projects. Now 11 years old, the twins had exceeded everyone's expectations. Relieved of the burden of their grandma's medical expenses, they could finally focus on their studies and personal interests. Emma spoke with shining eyes about her latest science project. "Uncle James, you won't believe it. Believe. My water purification experiment won first prize at the science fair, and my poem got selected to be published in the school magazine," Olivia chimed in, eager to share her own success. Pride swelled in James's chest. "That's wonderful news. I can't wait to see your experiment and read your poem." These Sunday dinners had become a cherished tradition. No matter how busy their weeks were, James juggling a reformed company, Margaret advancing foundation work, and the twins busy at school, they always made time to come together for this special meal. The mansion, once a symbol of James's isolation and aloofness, now teemed with warmth and life. The once silent corridors now echoed with the twins' laughter. The comforting aromas of Margaret's cooking filled the air, and each room glowed with a new sense of lightness. James was present at every important moment for the girls: school performances, homework sessions, even learning to braid their hair, though his early attempts had been rather comical. "Uncle James," Olivia called, pulling him from his reverie, "can you come to our dance recital next week?" James's heart warmed at the term Uncle James. It was a constant reminder of the special bond he had formed with these girls, a bond that transcended blood or obligation. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," he replied, smiling. "I've already blocked off my schedule and told the office I'll be unavailable that afternoon." Margaret watched the exchange with a knowing smile. She had become more than just the twins' grandmother to James. She was also his confidant and, in many ways, the mother figure he'd lost so young. "James," she said gently, "remember the first time you brought the girls here for dinner? You were so nervous, worried if they'd like the house or feel comfortable." James laughed, recalling that night. "I was a wreck. I must have rearranged the living room about 10 times before they arrived. And now look at us," Margaret continued, gesturing around the table. "A real family." The word family resonated deeply with James. He gazed around at the beaming faces overcome by emotion. This was a family no amount of money could purchase, one formed by unforeseen circumstances, nurtured by love, kindness, and the chance for redemption. "You know," James said, his voice catching with emotion, "I still wonder how it all happened sometimes. How one random encounter with 2 little flower sellers changed my entire life." Margaret placed her hand on his, smiling softly. "Perhaps it wasn't random, James. Perhaps fate was guiding us back into each other's lives." He nodded, recalling how Margaret had once cared for his ailing mother. It seemed the universe had aligned their paths at just the right moment, when they all needed each other most. "You all saved my life," James said, looking around the table. "Not just physically, by caring for Margaret. You saved my soul. You reminded me what truly matters." Sensing the gravity of the moment, Emma and Olivia stood from their chairs and wrapped their arms around James. "We love you, Uncle James," they said together. James returned their embrace, tears welling in his eyes. "I love you both, more than you could ever imagine." As the evening wore on, the conversation flowed freely, from funny school stories to updates on new foundation projects. James found himself reflecting on the past year, on the profound changes not only in his personal life, but also in how he led his company and philanthropic endeavors. His corporation, once notorious for placing profits above everything else, was now lauded as a champion of social responsibility. The Frost Foundation had touched thousands of lives, providing hope and opportunities where there had once been none. But more important than any business success or public recognition was the personal transformation James had undergone. The Iceman had melted away, replaced by a man full of compassion, gratitude, and a sense of belonging. Watching Margaret help the girls clear the table, insisting it was her turn to do the dishes, James felt an overwhelming sense of home. This was his family, built not through blood but through trials, second chances, and love. Later that night, with the twins tucked into bed and Margaret preparing to leave, James walked her to the door. "Margaret," he said, voice thick with emotion, "I can never repay you for everything you've done. For caring for my mother all those years ago, for giving me a second chance now. You are, well, your family." Margaret smiled, her own eyes misty. "Oh, James, you've always been family. From the moment I saw you, that frightened little boy at your mother's bedside, I knew our destinies were connected. I'm so proud of the man you are now." They embraced, sharing a moment filled with decades of shared history, loss and rediscovery, mistakes and new beginnings. Once Margaret had gone, James returned to the now quiet living room. He picked up a framed photograph on the mantel, a recent snapshot of them all taken during a picnic in the park. Their beaming faces captured in that image told a story of healing, redemption, and unconditional love. Running his finger over their smiling faces, James felt a rush of gratitude. Fate had indeed brought them back together, in a way he could never have foreseen. Through their bond, he had not only found a family but rediscovered himself. Setting the photo back on the shelf, James headed to his bedroom. Tomorrow would be another busy day, managing the company, working on the foundation's projects, sharing precious moments with his new family. For the first time in his life, James Frost looked forward to every new day, because now he knew he was no longer alone. He had a family, one fate had brought together, one love had forged, and no sum of money could ever buy. That, more than anything else, was the true treasure of his life. James Frost sat in his home office, gazing out the window at the garden where Emma and Olivia played happily. The sound of their laughter drifted in through the open door, filling the house with an exuberance he'd once thought impossible. He picked up a framed photo on his desk, an image of him, the twins, and Margaret, all smiling at a picnic. He traced the outlines of their radiant faces, recalling the extraordinary journey that had led him here. It was almost ironic, he mused, how one lie, that moment when he pretended to be blind to test the honesty of two twin beggars, had been the catalyst that ultimately brought so much truth into his life. That single lie, which had seemed insignificant at the time, became the first step on his path to a profound transformation. In their innocence and childlike wisdom, the twins had taught him a lesson in honesty that no business book or corporate mentor could match. They had shown James the power of truth, integrity, and compassion. What surprised James most was the forgiveness and unconditional love he received from them. Despite his initial deception, the girls and Margaret had welcomed him into their lives, granting him a second chance he hadn't even known he needed. Looking out the window again, James watched Margaret join the girls in the yard. Fully recovered, she was strong and vibrant once more, due not only to the medical care he had arranged, but also to the renewed purpose she found in helping others through the Frost Foundation. Seeing her so healthy and alive filled him with gratitude. The twins, for their part, were thriving. Free from the worry of providing medicine for their grandmother, they now had room to explore their talents, enjoy school, and simply be kids. They had blossomed in ways James never thought possible. As for James himself, his life had taken on a significance that previously eluded him. The days of obsessing over profits and power were behind him. Now every decision he made, every project he started, was guided by a higher purpose. To make a difference, to leave the world better than he found it. He realized this family, because that's what they were to him now, a family, had shown him that the strongest bonds aren't necessarily formed by blood. The love, understanding, and support they shared were deeper and more genuine than any biological connection could be. James still marveled at how drastically he had changed. The Iceman, as some once called him, had melted away, replaced by a man who could laugh freely, shed tears without shame, and truly care about the people around him. He had reconnected with his emotions, learned to value people above profits, and discovered joy in life's simplest moments. True wealth, James now understood, wasn't found in bank statements or corporate shares. It was found in the smiles of Emma and Olivia when he came home, in Margaret's gentle counsel, in the moments they all shared around the dinner table. It was in the sense of belonging, of purpose, of unconditional love. Thinking about all this, James couldn't help but smile. Fate had worked in mysterious ways. Two small flower sellers, whom he initially saw as nothing more than pawns in a cynical experiment, had turned out to be angels in disguise, leading him back to the path of warmth and humanity. Emma and Olivia were indeed the catalysts of his transformation, the guiding lights that restored him when he was lost in darkness. Without even realizing it, they performed a miracle, turning a cold, calculating man into someone capable of love, compassion, and genuine change. James rose from his chair and walked to the window, observing his family in the garden. Margaret glanced up at that moment, waving at him with a smile full of affection and understanding. The twins, noticing her gesture, called out in unison, "Come play with us, Uncle James." With a grin, James left his office and headed outside. As he ran around with the girls, feeling the sun's warmth on his face and the love warming his heart, James Frost knew he had discovered the true miracle of life: love, family, and redemption. In that perfect moment, surrounded by the love of his chosen family, James felt a deep gratitude for the strange twist of fate that used two little angels to save him, guiding him back to the path of humanity and love. Afternoon wore on as James, Margaret, and the twins continued playing in the garden, their laughter echoing across the property. Eventually, tired but cheerful, they all settled on the soft grass, forming a small circle. James looked at each of them: Margaret, with her wise smile and gentle eyes; Emma and Olivia, their cheeks flushed with excitement and their eyes shining with happiness. He felt a wave of emotion wash over him, a blend of gratitude, love, and profound peace he had never experienced before. "You know," he said softly, "a few years ago, I thought I had everything. But now I realize I had nothing that truly mattered. You've given me the greatest gift of all, a family, a home, a purpose." Margaret reached out and squeezed his hand gently. "And you gave us a second chance at life, James. I guess we've all been blessed." The twins, sensing the gravity of the moment, nestled closer to James. "We love you, Uncle James," Emma said. "Forever and ever," Olivia added. James wrapped both girls in a warm embrace, tears of happiness prickling his eyes. "I love you too, my sweet girls," more than words can say. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky with hues of gold and pink, the Frost family remained there, basking in the simple joy of being together. And James, once known as the Iceman, felt his heart overflow with warmth, gratitude, and love. He finally understood that the true miracle was not just his own transformation, but the power of love to heal, unite, and create a family where once there was none. With that comforting thought, James hugged his present and gazed toward the future with hope and happiness, thankful for the twist of fate that used two little flower sellers to show him the real meaning of life.